Michael J.
Yeah, we're back.
Thank you, Jim. We are back. Thanks, Don. I'm very grateful that we're able to have this kind of interaction in this kind of situation because different perspectives are very important. Scott's perspective with respect to supporting Trump is the right thing. It's just. But I want to point out that when we saw Donald Trump elected, when we saw the threats being manifest with Black Lives Matter and Black Panthers against the Republican National Congress, convention, when we saw literally tens of thousands of people on motorcycles ride across America to join in Washington or to protect the RNC, when we saw the groundswell of people who hadn't voted in decades to actually join Mr. Trump and make him president, that was actually the tip of the iceberg. There were many millions more that couldn't do that. And the reality is that if Mr. Trump wanted to truly make war, and I'm hoping he does, I'm hoping he gets encouraged. If he wants to truly make war against these swamp creatures, against these demonized, sociopathic people with moral diseases that infect the Congress and the Senate, he can get all the help he needs from the American people. Oh my goodness, Mr. Trump, you can even call Scott Bennett and bring in Shell Game and expose all of this corruption that's been going on, that he has the records. And hey, it includes WikiLeaks. You can have the truth. You can present it with a bully pulpit like no other bully pulpit we've seen in our lifetimes, because you had the greater support than any other president in the history of America against the backdrop of what happened to another great president, JFK, when he was challenging the CIA, the Federal Reserve, and globalism and regime change. What we're looking at, President Trump, is, like Scott said, you not only have the election to lose, you have the American people to lose if you don't accept the mandate that was handed to you as we threw you over the opposition and into the end zone in spite of everything. Jim.
Thank you, Michael J. Meanwhile, we have China backing Russia and Venezuela. Chinese troops are there. Has China sent troops to Venezuela? Yes. This is part of the fallout from the Democrats attacking the Russians for Hillary's loss to Trump. Venezuela still subscribed to communism. Neither Russia nor China agrees with that philosophy today. Therefore, what they are doing is merely opposing the U.S. because of the tension raised by the Democrats. They have played a very dangerous game, and in the process, they have done far more damage to our future than anyone realizes. The polls show more than 70% of Democrats see the Russians as our enemy. All of this so they can win the White House back in 2020. You do not attack major powers like this for personal gains. The tensions they have set in motion are very real. Meanwhile, we have Trump advisors mulling an attack on Venezuela, which would be one of the great absurdities of our time. Maduro has ordered the Venezuelan civilian militia expanded by nearly 1 million members, very appropriate in the face of these kinds of threats. Meanwhile, you have Tulsi Gabbard observing that Netanyahu and Saudi Arabia want to drag the U.S. into a war with Iran, and Trump is submitting to their wishes. The cost in money and lives could be catastrophic. I'm all with her here. Meanwhile, the U.S. troops pull out of Libya as fallout from Obama-Clinton policies continue. U.S. intervention in Libya in 2011 continues to reap the whirlwind of tragedy as forces in opposition to the legitimate government and national accord are attacking the capital city of Tripoli. In short, it's a mess. A rogue general looking to take over the government is making the security situation for U.S. troops complex and unpredictable, according to the Marine General in Command, General Thomas Waldhauser. The worsening security situation is a direct result of policies formulated by President Obama and Secretary of State Hillary Clinton when the U.S. led a coalition of forces to oust Libyan dictator Muammar Gaddafi. The reasoning behind the intervention, that the U.S. had a responsibility to protect Libyan citizens from Gaddafi, which is as absurd as it gets, since Gaddafi was creating a humane society, perhaps the most humane ever realized on earth, had no basis in any strategic interest of the U.S. and with no organizational opposition to Gaddafi had no chance of success, and it was unbased and unwarranted in the beginning. It was the worst foreign policy debacle of the Obama presidency, but it's largely been swept under the rug. Disappeared from history lest it tarnish the legacy of Barack Obama. The Libyan uprising was part of the Arab Spring that was encouraged by Obama Clinton, resulted in massive loss of life, not changing the political conditions in any country, another failure that has been forgotten. U.S. troops should never go back. The government of Libya does not control much territory. Appears to be a hopeless cause to try to unite the various factions like Syria. Another Obama-Clinton failure. Combatants will be fighting over scraps for years to come. Meanwhile, the U.S. calls on the UN to revoke the credential of Maduro's government, another manifest absurdity where the United States is making itself look like a bully on the block, and a stupid one at that, insulting the intelligence of every other nation. The time has come for the UN to recognize interim President Juan Guaido as a legitimate president of Venezuela and seat his representatives in this body. Vice President Pence said in his address to the UN, just so disgraceful beyond words. Unfortunately, as enthusiastic as I am about Tulsi Gabbard, she's come out very strongly in favor of undermining the Second Amendment. She supports a federal ban on military-style assault weapons and high-capacity magazines. She wants to require comprehensive pre-purchase background checks. She wants to close the gun show loophole, wants to make sure terrorists are not allowed to buy guns. We all want that. Tulsi supported gun control, has led her a rating of 100% by the Brady campaign to prevent gun violence with an F. From the NRA, 0% from the Hawaii Rifle Association. This is very disturbing. We don't need a gun grabber in the White House. Meanwhile, a positive development, a judge has declared a California gun law unconstitutional in its entirety. In 1 year, in 2017, a population of 39 million people endured 56,609 robberies, 105,391 aggravated assaults, and 95,942 residential burglaries, said Judge Benitez. There were also 423 homicides in victims' residences. There were no mass shootings in 2017 in California. Nationally, the first study to assess the prevalence of defensive gun use estimates there are 2.2 to 2.5 million, 2.2 to 2.5 million defensive gun uses by civilians each year, he continued. Of those, 340,000 to 400,000 defensive gun uses were situations where defendants believed that they had almost certainly saved a life by using the gun. Citizens often use guns to defend against criminal attacks, and we know it works. Scott.
Right.
Well, yeah, Tulsi Gabbard sticks her foot in her own mouth, and I don't like, and I wouldn't want any gun grabbing person in the White House. Of course, it's totally unconstitutional. It's you know, a political move by her side to win the Democrats, of course, but it's a disqualifier. So these Democrats always evoke what's in their hearts, and this would defeat Tulsi against Trump. But of course, the other political reality is the international situation. And as I've said before, the international foreign policy will cause Trump to lose this election if it goes seriously sour. And the Democrat candidate, and I think Tulsi is the leading one to say this because she's got the military credentials, if she blames him for this and says it with a sufficient passion on a debate stage that points her finger and says, you're responsible for this, Mr. Trump. Venezuela was fine before you started listening to Mike Pence and Pompeo and Bolton. She doesn't have to blame it on Trump himself. She could blame it on all of his advisors and say, you let this happen in Venezuela. You got the Russians and the Chinese in Venezuela. You've sent hundreds of thousands of people to the border. You've destabilized Syria. You've destabilized Iran. You've made all these foreign policy decisions that have flooded the Europeans with Muslim refugees because you've continued the failed policies. I'm ceasing and stopping them. That's what Trump said originally and got him elected, but he hasn't followed through, and that could get him diselected, if you will. But domestic policy, he wins on. He wins on the border. He wins on gun rights. He should declare an executive order that recognizes the Second Amendment, gives you the right to keep and bear arms, concealed and unconcealed, in every state in the Union. That's what the Second Amendment is, and he could write that as an executive order. That would win him the majority of the people, 50% plus one of the people who want gun availability to defend themselves. But the foreign policy is a problem. But I think if he steers a pathway to peace and stability and harmony, and stops the endless regime changes that Bolton are pushing him on, he'll be fine. Jim?
Well, heretofore, we've only heard the negative side of gun use, these manufactured shooting events, for example. No talk about the defensive use of gun rights. 2.2 to 2.5 million defensive uses of guns. Take them away from the American people, and you got 2.2 to 2.5 million more crimes committed where American citizens have been unable to defend themselves. That's an outrage. No candidate who supports gun control ought to be elected to the American Congress, period. Michael J.
2 million victims. Yeah, go ahead.
We took an oath along with all government officials to defend the Constitution. And when we see people intentionally destroying that oath by promoting the abolition of the First and Second Amendment and other amendments that are accommodated by the NDAA and these total surveillance situations that were created by the false flag of 9/11, we see that the war for America, the war for the independence of America, and the fact that the UN treaty on gun control is being, it seems, brought closer and closer by Democrat policies, then we see that Tulsi Gabbard doesn't seem to understand that no terrorist ever has to buy their own gun, okay? They will, and they won't get it legally. And if you're a terrorist going to Syria, the United States will buy your guns for you, including anti-aircraft guns and missiles. So terrorists don't buy their guns, Tulsi, and you should know this. But the reality is we've got people in America who understand that, that they will never, and many tens of millions of veterans, including everybody on this program, will never give their guns up because we understand what happens. Historical reality has settled in our lives, and we understand why we have the Second Amendment. Jim?
19 democides in the 20th century, each of which was preceded by gun confiscation. Let's not make America number 20. I have written to Tulsi twice now with data that ought to educate her. If she comes around, we can still support her. But I agree with Scott. This is a disqualifying issue. Meanwhile, we have Trump's betrayal of white America. Unlike other presidents, I keep my promises, Trump boasted in a speech delivered Saturday to the Republican Jewish Congress at a luxury hotel in Las Vegas. Many in the audience wore red yarmulkes emblazoned with his name in his speech. He condemned the Democrats for allowing the terrible scourge of anti-Semitism to take root in their party and emphasized his loyalty to Israel. He scrapped most of his promises, including every one he made to the Jewish community, yet he's reneged on his promises to white America, the promises that got him elected in the first place. It's a betrayal of the highest order. Millions of white Americans place their hopes in Trump and wholeheartedly believe he would be the one to make America great again. They were willing to endure social ostracism and imperil their livelihoods by supporting him. In return, Trump has turned his back on them and rendered his promises void. The most recent example of this is his failure to keep the promise to close the border. On March 29th, he threatened to close the Mexican border if Mexico did not stop all illegal immigration. This would likely have been a highly efficient measure given Mexico's dependence on cross-border trade. 5 days later, he suddenly retracted this threat, saying he'd give Mexico a one-year warning before taking drastic action. He further claimed that closing the border would not be necessary and that he planned to establish a 25% tariff on cars entering the U.S. Trump's failure here is his alone. Closing the border could be accomplished with a simple executive order. It happened before. Reagan ordered the closing of the border when DEA agent Enrique Kiki Camarera was murdered on assignment in Mexico in 1985, for example. Trump's empty threats over the past few years have had real-world consequences, prompting waves of migrants to try to sneak into the country while they have the chance. His recent move to cut foreign aid to Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador is another empty gesture that will have similar consequences. The funds directed at those countries were used for programs that provided citizens with incentives not to migrate elsewhere. The situation wasn't ideal from an isolationist point of view, but a wiser man would have built the wall before cutting off the aid. The past 2 years have seen a surge in illegal immigration without precedent in the past decade. Since late December, the Department of Homeland Security has released 125,565 illegal aliens into the country. In the past 2 weeks alone, 6,000 have been admitted. According to current projections, 2019 will witness around 500,000 to 750,000 border crossings. Additionally, around 630,000 illegal aliens will be added to the population after having overstayed their visa. By the end of the year, more than 1 million illegal aliens will have been added to the population. These projections put the number of illegals added to the U.S. population about 1 to 1.5 million on top of the 11 to 22 million who are already here. This finding does not factor in the illegal aliens who will be deported, die over the next year, or leave the U.S. of their own free will, as DHS data has revealed. However, once border crossers and illegal aliens are released into the country, the overwhelming majority are never deported. In February, Trump signed a bill allowing the DHS secretary to add another 69,320 spots to the current cap of 66,000. In March 29, DHS began the process by announcing it would issue an additional 30,000 H-2B visas. The H-2B visa allow foreign worker to come to the U.S. and work in non-agricultural occupation. Unlike the H-1B program, a bachelor's degree is not required. Most H-2B workers are employed in construction, maintenance, landscaping, and so on. The demographic most affected by the expansion of the H-2B program will be unemployed working-class Americans. This flies in the face of Trump's promise to protect American workers and stop importing foreigners. Meanwhile, we have the CalExit movement joining forces with the cartels of terrorists and corrupt Democrats to overthrow the United States from David Hodges. The dots are beginning to connect to the Otslan plan and the CalExit movement. At the heart of it is George Soros. However, many prominent members of the former Obama administration are participating, as well as California's past and present governors. The goal is to remove California from the United States and collapse the U.S. economy, and they'll do so by any means possible. According to Paul Preston, who's a truth speaker, by the way, it was he who reached out to his contacts in the Obama Department of Education, who confirmed to him it had been a drill and that no one had died at Sandy Hook and that it was done to promote gun control. He's in the book. Reports are coming that numerous state legislators from California, including California Senate Pro Tem Kevin DeLyon, state representatives from Florida, Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, Nevada, Utah, and Colorado have been meeting with members of La Raza, the Mexican government consulate, Mexican mafia, La California's violent Mexican gang, Norteños, Sorrento, Sur 13, La Familia, and leaders of the Catholic Jesuit Church. They've all come up with a plan to separate California from the U.S. As Paul Preston has uncovered, Chapman University is spearheading the political goals of La Raza to regain the Southwest. Europeans go home, whites not allowed. These are the battle cries of a movement designed to recapture lost Mexican territory as a result of the Mexican War. No doubt the Democrats want to give them a bounty, just as they want to repay those who never were slaves out of money from people who never owned slaves. The insanity of the United States, the Democratic Party, is virtually complete. Meanwhile, Tucker wisely observes, we have troops in 158 countries, but not on our own southern border. Scott.
Well, Jim, there is a movement called the NewCaliforniaState.com. I would encourage people to visit because it is the response to this La Raza, CalExit, George Soros, Eric Holder attempt to split California from the Union. And they've been reading grievances in public squares and places. President Trump is on board with New California. He is supporting it. And it is an attempt to create a new state out of the constitutional process where the legislature of California votes to split California in two, similar to what they did in West Virginia and elsewhere. And it's legitimate splitting to create the conservative state and alienate these mecca power centers of sanctuary cities and illegal illegal alien holds in Los Angeles and San Francisco and elsewhere. And La Raza means the race. This is a racist, anti-white, anti-European movement that Paul Preston has had close experience with when he was a school administrator, and many others have. And it is an attempt to steal California and really turn it into another cartel organization. It will fail because of the guns that every American has in California. But this is an exciting time. One thing they may do, Jim, they could destroy the Oroville Dam and cause that to flood the center of California as a distraction operation to get federal funds to come in and alleviate all of the bankruptcy that California certainly has. And that, of course, may trigger the president to recognize that California's government is effectively dissolved and that New California is the current government, and recognize a splitting of the state. So that we're about to enter in what could be the first gunfire of the Civil War in America, starting in California. And I think it would side with those who are seeking to create a conservative state and divorce itself from the La Raza, Gavin Newsom, communist, the Chinese, the Vatican types that have been pushing this whole La Raza agenda. I think we're going to observe that in the next coming year. So it's going to be exciting. Go ahead, Jim.
Michael J. Voice, Michael J.
Thank you. Thank you. The reality of California being at risk is evident in all these things. The huge snowfall that we had and continue to have is an evidence of geoengineering, and the dam is filling up to capacities that it may not be able to handle because other dams that were taking the pressure off have been actually allowed to degenerate or have been removed. We are facing a serious threat here in California. And this issue of the La Raza, the racist agenda, means that with Trump allowing the continued border crossings of people that are military age, it may be that people are being brought up here because they were trained by the CIA and trained by other Jesuit-controlled organizations. They're being brought up here into America to facilitate the start of a civil war in California, because it's evident for numerous reasons that what happens first in California, identified as a pilot state, can easily spread into the rest of the nation. We do have, according to people like James and Joanne Moriarty, a number of terrorist, that is Islamic terrorist training camps in California and other places in America. And Mr. Trump is not mentioning these things. Mr. Trump is not talking about these things. And you have to wonder why, because the reality is Mr. Trump has America right now willing to fight for him and to fight for America, but he is not calling on the American people. He's keeping it very much this small cabal of people that seem to be Americans but fail at almost every level. Jim?
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Meanwhile, Biden remains strong in the poll in early voting states. I don't expect that is going to endure. He had 32%. His nearest competitor was Bernie at 23%. No other candidate came close. Kamala 9%, Beto 8%, Elizabeth 7%, Peter 5%. This guy I never even heard of. He's apparently the mayor of Indianapolis. Corey 4%, Kirsten Gillibrand, Amy Klobuchar, who are disappearing too. Biden's score was just 1 percentage point from a survey released last week. Trump's job approval, on the other hand, has jumped to 53%, 7 points higher than Obama. On April 9th, a little over 2 years into his first term, 46% of those polled by Rasmussen approved of the job Obama was doing, compared to 53% who disapproved. That put Barry upside down by 7 points. On the issue of strongly approve and strongly disapprove, Obama was upside down by a whopping 17 points, with only 21% strongly approving of the job he was doing, while 38% strongly disapproved. On April 9, 2019, a little over 2 years into his presidency, however, 53% of those polled by Rasmussen approve of the job Trump is doing, only 45% disapprove. That puts Trump 8 points to the good. On the issue of strongly approve and strongly disapprove, Trump is 1 point in the black, with 37% saying they strongly approve of the job, while 36% strongly disapprove. The whole idea behind the Russia collusion hoax was not to allow Trump to be seen as presidential, and most of all, to never allow him to be seen as legitimate. The media and Democrats were desperate not only to overturn his election using lies peddled by the corrupt FBI and even more corrupt intel community, but to ensure a cloud hung over Trump and, by extension, his agenda. The removal of this cloud, especially by a dirty cop like special counsel Robert Mueller, who is obviously out to get Trump by any means necessary, now allows the public to see Trump as what he truly is, a duly elected president of the United States, the legitimate leader of our country. We will always be a polarized country, which means barring the 9/11 type event, Trump's approval rating, like Obama's before him, will never break far from 50%, but everything now is about re-election. And with the Russia hoax debunked, Trump is a now legitimate president, will be judged like any other president come time for re-election. The economy, the economy, the economy. Rasmussen was among the most accurate pollsters in 2016. Meanwhile, a woman who knew Obama in high school said he was well known to be a gay druggie and a foreign student at the time, which confirms everything else we know about this man who perpetrated an enormous fraud on the American people. He and his presumptive wife, who's actually a man with breast implants, not even a woman. Absolutely stunning stuff. Scott.
Well, Jim, I voted for Donald Trump, and I don't regret it in any way, shape, or form. I think he was the best man for the job, and I still think that. So when you look at Donald Trump compared to Hillary Clinton, it's like choosing Glinda over the Wicked Witch of the East, or whatever it was. And there's no comparison. So I fully support Trump, and I still do, and I will in the next election, of course. And I think all of the other effeminate eunuchs that were up there with the Republican flag and lapel were nothing but establishment whores, and were, in fact, guilty of crimes. Jeb Bush was guilty of crimes. 9/11 was a false flag CIA, Mossad, Saudi Arabian operation, the greatest crime in the history of civilization. Trump said it when he was on TV, when he was on the film cameras. His people told him there were explosions. Okay, that doesn't change. You don't walk away from it. How you attack it, how you expose it without ending up like John F. Kennedy is another matter. Right. So he has kids, he has grandkids. I understand his intrepidation and his calculation for how to get this out. You and I and Robert David Steele and Michael J. and many others are aware of the deep truths here. But it's another thing for the American public who have no clue. And aside from those who watch Don's show and watch this, the majority of the American public are as dumb as a bag of rocks. And that's why it's important to remind them, look, Donald Trump, he may not be the perfect candidate, but he represents 50% plus one of your values, your economic values, your gun values, your family values, and your identity as an American citizen. Some of the things he does, I don't agree with, but I blame entirely on the people advising him. If he gets better advisors, if he gets people like Senator Dick Black, if Dick Black comes in into a capacity and advises him in the Middle East operations, Trump will be loved much more than he is now, because Senator Black is loved. He's loved by the Iranians, the Syrians, and the Russians. And of course, Senator Black is another major pawn that will be coming out, because Andrew McCabe, who is the FBI director, tried to remove Senator Black so he could put his wife, Jill McCabe, in Senator Black's position. And they tried to do this by sending 4 FBI agents down to Senator Black's office and try to convince him to fly to Syria to rescue some journalist. I'm convinced they were going to kill him, but he didn't fall for the bait. That's another obstruction of justice and abuse of government authority that Andrew McCabe needs to answer for. That's another case that all of these people at Judicial Watch who have this information, who I've talked to, Chris Farrell, Tom Fitton, they need to act on this. None of this material is going to be allowed to go away. It will always be brought up to the surface, and you're either standing on the side of truth or you're going to be rolled over, pummeled, and destroyed by it because it's not stopping. Americans are never going back to pre-Trump America. They're never going back to another false flag Twin Tower attacks that launched us into this juggernaut of conquest. We're trying to roll back that. We're trying to get back to Reagan's America, and where it is mourning in America again with the rising sun of pride, not mourning as in looking upon the death corpse of what America once was. I will go for the former and fight to the death to resurrect the hope of a glorious America, not this prison police state we've currently been subjugated by. Jim?
Michael J.
Thank you. Concerning Biden, the molester, this is really that this is the cream of the crop of the demonic rat party. This whole demonic rat mindset is causing a spiritual and moral meltdown in a great many people in America, because we're realizing they have come unhinged. There's a departure from a moral standard from the America we used to have and believe in and embrace. This is a spiritual descent into confusion, gender confusion, moral confusion, and also they've made a business out of professional victims. That's what you see in the demonic rat party, how to raise up a whole culture of victimhood and making claims and special status and identifying yourself as something other than you are. But what we're seeing here is that Donald Trump was given something that Barack Obama never had. And while we're on or mentioning that name, Barack Hussein Obama, we need to realize Trump has, I believe, lawful right to totally cancel and nullify his presidency because he was never qualified. All of his executive orders need to be overlooked or canceled because he was never a legitimate president. And this is something that's got legal precedent, and I'm not sure why Mr. Trump isn't doing it, because America is under attack. America is at war, and the people that are attacking Donald Trump on many areas are attacking the American people in areas that Donald Trump will never be affected by. Donald Trump has all sorts of security, but people like Lindsey Graham want to have a red flag executive law coming out of the federal government so that people can be challenged as to whether or not, under somebody who you will not know, somebody complaining, saying you're a danger to yourself and others, and they will send a SWAT team out to disarm you. Now, the reality is, why isn't Mr. Trump saying anything about this? Mr. Trump has got millions and tens of millions of Americans who want a leader, that who want to take the moral high ground and start shining a light on the wickedness that's been legalized and franchised in America. So thank you, Jim. Up to you.
Thank you, Michael J. Meanwhile, we have a gun maker to ask the Supreme Court to hear a Sandy Hook appeal. The maker of the rifle used in the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting, that should say purportedly because it didn't happen, intends to ask the U.S. Supreme Court to hear its appeal of a Connecticut court ruling that reinstated a wrongful death lawsuit against the company filed by the victim's relatives. Facing a newly revived wrongful death lawsuit in Connecticut over the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting, gunmaker Remington is going to the U.S. Supreme Court to argue it can't be sued because of a much-debated federal law that shields firearm manufacturers from liability in most cases, and how appropriately so, as I've reported before. Robert David Steele responded to this lawsuit by saying it was as absurd as if a victim of a hit and run were able to sue Buick because the driver had been using a Buick, except that could be a real case, equally absurd with this, where nobody died at Sandy Hook. The Connecticut Supreme Court issued a 4-3 ruling last month saying the Madison, North Carolina company can be sued over the Bushmaster AR-15. It's by far the most effective and popular weapon we need to protect the public from tyranny. That's why they want to take it. Meanwhile, you have Oregon's SB 978 gun control bill is so hysterically restrictive that even pepper spray turns out to be a felony. A new gun control bill introduced in the Oregon State Legislature added 45 pages of draconian amendments the night before the vote. It passed the Judiciary Committee yesterday and now heads to the Oregon Senate. I sent this article to every member of the Oregon House and every member of the Oregon Senate, this very article. They want to raise the minimum age to buy a gun to 21. The following may establish a minimum age of 18, 19, 20, or 21, a person, and so forth. I point out that gun ownership and homicide rates are inversely related, as anyone who's watched this program for any period of time is well aware. Gun owners are going to be liable for the act of gun thieves. How absurd is that? If you have kids, look out. Any adult that transfers a firearm to a minor is responsible for any action taken by that minor with a firearm. And if you want to take your kids shooting or hunting, they must be directly supervised. If a young person gets a hold of a parent's gun, the parent is liable for the young person's action. If the gun isn't secured as per the rules above, the adult is charged with even more crimes. Oregon also wants to crack down on unregistered guns. The next section deals with ghost guns. Pages 11 through 19 offers a lengthy list of rules, restrictions, requirement, and record keeping for the transfer of antique guns, gun parts, and much more. If you have them, you'll be a felon upon the passage of this bill. Simply absurd. I also embedded a lengthy study I did about the Second Amendment and the politics of gun control. You can find it right on my blog. Another section makes it more complicated to transport a gun. Gun owners are not concealed carry permit holders will have to jump through all sorts of hoops to transport a firearm in a vehicle, including locking it in a box in a secure area of the vehicle. Concealed carry permit fees are going to go up. Then there's the stuff about public buildings. In this bill, you can find a massive list of restrictions regarding having a gun on the premises or near a public building. This is just insanity, complete insanity. Scott.
Well, there's a reason why the Second Amendment is inviolable. The state, the president, the Congress, the court cannot take it away, cannot violate it, and the American people need to rise up and affirm that in all means necessary. And I think the Supreme Court hearing of the Remington case is a perfect opportunity for you to introduce your briefing on Sandy Hook as an amicus brief, Jim, to support the fact that the Sandy Hook shooting event allegedly did not match the ballistic requirements of what a real shooting event would have done. So this entire case is fraudulent and should be ruled by the Supreme Court as fruit of the poisonous tree based on the evidence. You could do a very quick blitz and win the whole football game by sneaking in through a amicus brief to the Supreme Court to defend Remington. And anything's possible. We don't make laws that hold crossbow manufacturers illegal for firing projectiles at people. So we can't do the same thing for a rifle company, Remington. We can't sue a table saw manufacturer if people are using the table saws to throw and kill people. So the whole notion of suing gun companies is ridiculous. It's pushed by the fanatics. But of course, this is a time we're in a civil war. We always have to remember that. This country is in the civil war, and I said it months ago, someone would burn themselves alive in protest, and that just happened last week.
You did. You predicted that, Scott, and it did happen.
And that's going to happen more and more. These leftists are going to kill themselves, hit themselves on the head, shoot themselves in public, to say, unless you vote Democrat, unless you walk away from Trump, I'm going to hurt myself. That is the insanity we're about to enter into the final stages of this country's complete meltdown into schizophrenia. But as conservatives, we can't stop crazy people from being crazy. We can just hopefully say, go ahead, do what you want to do, and cleanse the country of your leprosy of stupidity. Jim?
Michael J.
Thank you. I think that gun manufacturers and many good manufacturers are in Connecticut, Remington and Sturm Ruger among them. I think that they should actually find a new home. I think they should take their tax base with them and leave Connecticut, because Connecticut is controlled by the Jesuits and by the Zionists. It is the bedroom community of the New York Zionist collective. And it is really profoundly anti-American. Connecticut used to be a truly patriotic state, along with many of the New England states. But I think Remington should leave there. I think that the American people begin to understand that what we're experiencing is that, as you pointed out, Jim, and Scott also, that the unalienable rights were never granted by government. They were just recognized by a moral and honest government in times past. Right now, unalienable rights are despised. And let's consider what's going on in Oregon, because I believe that Governor Brown, who was facilitating the murder of Lavoy Finicum and the treatment of American patriots as criminals, working with the Obama administration, she is somebody who hates the real America, who hates unalienable rights in the Constitution. And the people in America should actually start organizing against traitors like Governor Brown. And these people, as you have sent them information, and I'm so grateful that you did this, Jim, but these people don't want information because they've already sold themselves to these policies of destruction in America. Over to you.
Yeah, I'll just say that the fire in Paris for the Notre Dame Cathedral is it's taken it out, and it looks like everything else is getting beyond fire. It's pretty hot out there. So anyway.
I think Scott called that one, Don, that this is a Mossad op. It may be Bibi's way of celebrating his election to a fifth term as PM.
Right.
So scour the internet quickly before they can scrub anything. Get as much information and much video as we can possibly gather to put the forensic analysis together that may prove this is a false flag.
About events in Paris. Yeah.
Crucial time.
Yeah. Macron's supposed to speak. And they canceled Macron speaking today because of this. Go ahead.
Here we have Ron Paul observing that martial law could come under the guise of medical intervention. This is rather searching. Most people don't know that DARPA has been manufacturing vaccines for the last decade. Most people don't know an epidemic can be declared based on almost no evidence. Most people don't understand that FEMA and DARPA want to inject everyone they can with whatever they want. They have the power to make it happen under the guise of medical intervention. Utilizing vaccines grown on tobacco cells instead of the traditional chicken eggs, DARPA has turned out a staggering 10 million doses of flu vaccine in just 1 month. This Blue Angel project, as it's called, suddenly puts the Pentagon at the forefront of the vaccine business. The big question, why is the Army involved in vaccines at all? And the answer is not surprising. According to DARPA, it's all about readiness to contain bio threats. Translated, that means terrorist attacks that could use flu viruses perpetrated by the Pentagon itself. This is a sinister development. It creates a potential scenario in which the military can invent the bio threat and then step in and provide the solution. It doesn't really matter whether the bio threat is real or imaginary. The threat would offer the chance to initiate a martial law scenario after which the military vaccine would be made mandatory, destroying the right of each state in the union to permit, as is now the case, people to opt out of vaccination on religious, medical, or ethical grounds. And I say this is another area where there's likely to be gunfire breaking out in communities in the United States. There's already been a test run of a fake epidemic. Most people don't know that either. This is Rappaport reporting in 2009, you spearheaded coverage of the so-called swine flu pandemic. You discovered in the summer of 2010, the Center for Disease Control, ignoring their federal mandate, secretly stopped counting swine flu cases, yet they continue to stir up fear about the pandemic without having any real measure of its impact. Wasn't that another investigation of yours that was shut down? Wasn't there more to find out? Atkins and the implication of the story were even worse than that. We discovered through our FOIA effort before the CDC mysteriously stopped counting swine flu cases, they had learned that almost none of the cases they had counted as swine flu was in fact swine flu or even any sort of flu at all. The interest in the story from one CBS executive was very enthusiastic. He said it was the most original story he'd seen on the whole swine flu epidemic. But others pushed to stop it, and in the end, no broadcast wanted to touch it. We heard numerous stories pumping up the idea of an epidemic, but not the one that would shed the original new light on all the hype. It was fair, accurate, legally appropriate, and a heck of a story. With the CDC keeping the true swine flu stat secret, it meant that many in the public took and gave their children an experimental vaccine that may not have been necessary at all. Meanwhile, in Michigan, an Orwellian hate crime database is set up for thought criminals. This is absolutely stunning. Only in a world where the novel 1984 has become the evening news can we get a state attorney general working with the Department of Civil Rights to create a database for people committing hate and biased incidents that don't rise to the level of a crime or a civil infraction. This hate crimes unit apparently comes on the advice of the Southern Poverty Law Center, which issued a report about a rise of extremism and hatred within the state of Michigan. This itself is more than ironic, since it was reported last year that the organization had to pay $3 million for falsely labeling the Quillen Foundation as an example of anti-Muslim extremism in Michigan. Nevertheless, the SPLC still seems to be the go-to group for databasing the speech of the public at large. They've previously been linked to Google, currently the largest such de facto database in existence. Predictably then, there's been a pushback right out of the gate for those who have received the label of hate monger from the SPLC and by extension, the government of Michigan. And here we have part one of the 4 parts with Dr. Catherine Horton and myself discussing how to spot a false flag. Believe me, this is worth your while. Church militant St. Michael's Media in Ferndale is listed by the Law Center as an anti-LGBT hate group, where its editor-in-chief, Christine Niles, rejected the label and said to her knowledge the group's presence on the list is a first. We are not entirely sure what it means, she said, noting the group and its work is faithful to the Catholic Church teaching on marriage between a man and a woman. We have a right to believe that without being called a hate group. Meanwhile, church militants virtually anti-gay work demonizes gay people and qualifies it as one of the 1,020 U.S. hate groups identified by the Law Center on its last published S20. This is so absurd, it's unbelievable. Of course, I don't find the shred of hateful energy all that productive, nor would I find myself a member of this church belief system, but I don't see the mention of any actual crime. That's indeed a problem. Here's part 2 with Catherine Horton and myself on the blog. Michigan's Attorney General also appears to have added the Anti-Defamation League as a consultant, another group of dubious repute that has a penchant for complaining anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism, among other tangential relationship between political opinion and violent actions. Nevertheless, the head of the Department of Civil Rights is confident in these sources. It also cites a motivation behind the concept of cataloging thought crimes. This is unbelievable. Scott, your thoughts?
Well, it's going back to New California, for example. New California is formed because of the viruses and the chemtrails and the LGBTQRS forced education into their children, the sanctuary city laws. All of these burdens and these evils that have been done to the current population is causing them to rebel and reject that and create a new state through legal means. And one of the things on the Constitution is no chemtrails of any kind, no chemical alteration of the skies will be permitted, and it will be a pro-life state, a pro-Second Amendment state, it will be a conservative state. So all of these things that you're describing that are violations against the human body, violations of our clean, natural environment, our right to live in that, need to be rejected by every American. They do not have a right to experiment with people. That's in violation of the Nuremberg court hearings, where the Nazis were found guilty of violating the human body and human rights because they never gave permission and they never informed the population of what was being done to them. The same applies here. The American population have never been informed and never given their permission for the virus experimentation and the chemtrails and all of these other exterior acts upon American people's bodies and their families and such. So this is yet another justification for a civil war in America through constitutional, legal, political means. Jim?
Where do these come up with these whack jobs, Scott? It's just stunning to me. This is the Attorney General of Michigan who's gone completely bananas and Orwellian. I am stunned. Michael J.
Thank you. I think a lot of people that are in positions of government to make these kinds of decisions are morally compromised people. Michigan was the place where they actually erected the statue of Lucifer, Satan, with adoring children around it. On the Capitol steps, Michigan has been investigated concerning their embrace of pedophilic Wahhabi Islam and embracing that kind of Islam and that kind of immorality and destroying the moral foundation laws that were common in America. Now, martial law could come under the guise of medical intervention, but let's remember that the Salk and Sabin polio vaccine in the 50s that were given to millions of American children and adults was infected with the SV40 polyoma cancer virus. This was done with the full knowledge of the FDA, and the people that were investigating it found out that this was a virus that caused soft tissue cancers in every rat they experimented on. Those people were fired, okay, because this was part of, quote, the war on cancer brought in under Vice President Richard Nixon. And this reality actually allowed the cancer industry to be a growth industry in every sense of the word. So we also used the AIDS virus, that is, we had contaminated vaccines through the hepatitis B vaccination program for gay men, and it was called GRIDS when it began to appear in the early 80s, late 70s. And these same kinds of viruses were spread throughout Africa through the World Health Organization as a program for genocide. And the vaccine programs for the UN have been accused with the help of, by the way, sponsored vaccines through the Bill and Linda Gates Foundation for causing the blacks in Africa to become infertile. What we're looking at with these vaccines and forced vaccines and this distribution of disease is something that is part of a genocide program that's documented, by the way, in their desire to reduce the Earth's population to 500 million in the Georgia Guidestones. People need to understand that these kinds of things, though they are wholly and profoundly insane in conception, that these are the kinds of people that actually have no moral foundation and believe in getting rid of many people in the world. So I'm also looking at the fact that many doctors that exposed the use of Nagalase in child vaccination programs. Nagalase shuts down the body's ability to produce vitamin D and to have an effective immune system. And these doctors were killed because they were exposing this. And anyone could do a research about doctors killed exposing Nagalase in vaccines. Jim?
It's all about the Center for Disease Control, and it looks like our government can't be trusted.
Yes, there's a group that would know. Absolutely 100%, Don. You got it right. Meanwhile, we have Paul Craig Roberts reporting that America is no longer a nation. This is very disturbing stuff. The America in which I grew up and lived my early adult life was a nation. Over the course of my life, I've watched my country turn into a Tower of Babel. Homogeneity and shared values permitted us to understand one another. This doesn't mean that there was uniformity or that things were perfect. A Baptist wasn't a Catholic. A WASP was not a black laborer. A female was not a male. Blacks and poor whites had a hard time becoming middle class, but it could be done. It was possible for middle class people to become well off, but difficult to become rich. Immigration was controlled, and the reduction of inflows had helped the Irish and Italians integrate into society. But today, we find things are falling apart. Amazon is going to exit the collapsing liberal sanctuary city of Seattle as drug addiction, homelessness, and high business taxes make the leftist stronghold increasingly uninhabitable. Seeing the clear writing on the wall, corporate monolith Amazon has decided to pack its bags and head for greener pastures with recently leaked plans to completely flee its longtime hometown of Seattle by the year 2023. According to reports of Seattle City Council's recent attempts to impose citywide head tax, for which they would have billed Amazon and other large corporations some $275 per employee per year to pay for affordable housing, where Amazon currently employs more than 45,000 people at its Seattle headquarters, which means it would have had to fork out nearly $12.5 million a year for the city, was one of the last straws signaling to Amazon is no longer welcome in the liberal enclave. Sources say Amazon won't be going far, however. The company's already moving some of its employees just across Lake Washington to nearby Bellevue, which is actually where Amazon was originally started, before Jeff Bezos decided not long after the company was formed to head to Seattle, where he believed he'd find the strongest talent pool. But because of how dramatically Seattle has changed in the interim with its embrace of extreme leftist politics that are highly unfavorable to companies trying to do business there, Amazon has decided to abandon its longtime roots and relaunch its operations elsewhere. Amazon plans to relocate its entire Seattle-based work-wide operation team to Bellevue, Washington by 2023, adding thousands of employees to its new campus just across Lake Washington, GeekWire recently revealed, citing an internal email it said it received from the company. Moving a large and critical team away from Amazon Seattle headquarters is a significant relocation of its employees on its own. It's also a weighty symbolic gesture, the clearest sign yet that the tech giant is cooling on its hometown while doubling down on a neighboring city. There was once a time when Seattle was a booming pro-business tech hub, drawing high-caliber talent from all across the globe. But things are now in rapid decline as the city's uber-liberal constituency pushes for more bleeding-heart policies that are systematically gutting the city's business sector. Whether one likes Amazon or not, there's no denying that this major corporation has created tens of thousands of relatively high-paying jobs for Seattleites, most of whom will now be moving to pro-business Bellevue, leaving what will only amount to economic blight for Seattle in its wake. A similar situation is what happened in Queens, where the queen of stupidity, Alexia Ocasio-Cortez, drove Amazon out of town before it even had the chance to set up shop. That seems to be the new leftist way, to condemn the business community and drive it out of town while simultaneously demanding that more free stuff be handed out to the public. None of the leftists who advocate for such a paradigm have ever an answer to how it will work economically, but they hell for it just the same. Meanwhile, the Boston Globe published an op-ed urging waiters to contaminate the food of Trump officials. This is about as disgusting as it gets. We're told that democracy can only work and get things done when political parties and opponents compromise, because in a democracy, winners are only temporary victors until the next election. And so political opponents each give up something in order to gain something. It's not all or nothing. Incredibly, after spending 2 hours scouring the web, I can't find any website, even alt media, that republished in the entirety O'Neill's poison food op-ed, not even the Internet Archives. I could find only these excerpts of the op-ed. One of the biggest regrets in my life, this is Luke O'Neill, is not pissing in Bill Kristol's salmon. I was waiting on the disgraced neoconservative panic and chief Iraq war cheerleader about 10 years ago at a restaurant in Cambridge. And to my eternal dismay, some combination of professionalism and pusillanimity prevented me from appropriately seasoning his entree. A ramekin of blood on the side might have been the better option, come to think of it. He always did seem really thirsty for the stuff. I was reminded of that episode this week when Secretary Homeland Security Kristen Nielsen, the purportedly reluctant triggerman for Donald Trump's inhumane policies of ethnic cleansing, announced she would be stepping down from her post at the president's request. The news comes a little over a year since she took the job, 9 months since she was infamously shame-marched out of a restaurant, a Mexican one of all things, in Washington, D.C. by a group of protesters, just as the news of our official policy of separating families at the southern border was first being reported. What a delight it was to see. He's so ignorant he doesn't know that Bill Clinton signed the policy and that Barack Obama enforced it. Don, are we out of time?
Yeah.
We're already out of time. Okay, let's just conclude by saying Tiger sealed his fifth Masters, first major championship, and one of the greatest comeback in sports history after more than 10 years out of the running. There he is, a Masters champion again. Once again, we thank you all for watching. Don, I give you the closing opportunity here.
Yeah. Now, we're a team of winners here. You're going to stick with us, and you're going to find that great. Thanks for watching for us on April 15th. So we ought to say adios. God bless.